President worried about losing support from Gen
No,
Z?
this is,
Or
well, let me be very clear. Let me be very clear. This is not about politics. It's not. The president does not lead his national security or things that are the right thing to do in this sense, right? Getting that hostage deal, making sure hostages come home, including, as I said, over and over again, American hostages, getting that humanitarian aid into Gaza and making sure that we believe that would lead to a ceasefire. That is not about politics. That is about the right thing to do.
That was White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre responding to a reporter asking about the politics of the U.S. abstaining from voting on a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Israel's war against the Hamas terrorist organization. Now, as we talked about yesterday, only 3 times previously in the history of the Security Council has the United States abstained. In fact, 53 times they've used their veto power to stand with and aid Israel against the global goons. There's been a change in policy. Joining me now to discuss this and much more, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise. He represents the 1st Congressional District of Louisiana, and he's out campaigning, getting ready for the upcoming election as he's helping out fellow Republicans. Leader Scalise, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
So when Congress returns, one of the first issues they will face is funding for our ally Israel, which currently is connected to funding of Ukraine, which does not have as much support in the House. What's going to happen?
Well, you've seen us move strong Israel aid packages in the past. We're going to continue to make sure we're standing with Israel. And look at the threat you just highlighted out of the White House. We're seeing open hostility towards the Jewish state of Israel, towards what Benjamin Netanyahu and his united coalition government is trying to do to destroy and eviscerate from the White House. They don't stand with this administration. I've never seen this before in the history of our relationship, going back to the formation of Israel as a Jewish state. So we need to continue to stand with Israel. House Republicans surely do. And so we're going to make sure we get them the aid they need. Obviously, there's other issues where we're at odds, but on Israel, we are united. In the House, on the Republican side, what is happening to the Democrat Party is disgraceful, to see them literally walking away from Israel before our very eyes and having basically a warm embrace towards this movement you're seeing against Israel and towards a lot of the the hostility against Israel. I don't know where it started coming from, but the far left really started moving it. And I think people are fed up with that.
So Congressman Scalise, you and I went to Israel a number of years ago, probably about a dozen years ago, in a bipartisan group from Congress, Democrats and Republicans. And as you said, this historically, the issue of Israel, standing with Israel, has been a bipartisan issue until now. What's changed?
I think you've seen the radical left take over the Democrat Party, and you've seen Joe Biden move with them. Joe Biden's always, again, if you look at his 50-year career in public office, he's been a weather vane for the Democrat Party. When they were the party that worked with Newt Gingrich to balance budgets, he was there with them. When they were just kind of the traditional liberal union party. But then once they became a socialist movement with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC as the stalwarts, Joe Biden started listening to them and taking his orders from them. And the problem is that they're hostile towards Israel. You saw Chuck Schumer making those comments the other day, calling for literally a change in administration. You even had some of Bibi's opponents in Israel standing behind Bibi because they're at war right now. This is not a time where you walk away from your allies. And yet some in the Democrat Party in Washington are doing just that. You saw, what the White House did, not vetoing that action by the UN Security Council to literally go after Israel, call for a ceasefire without even demanding that the hostages be released by Hamas. They're literally trying to equate Hamas and Israel on the same level, and they're not. Hamas ended the ceasefire on October 7th when they invaded and brutally barbarically murdered women, children, others, and took hostages that they still have to this day.
So, as you stated, Israel, the Republicans, unified funding for Israel. Will we see a separation? Right now, the supplemental includes both Israel, Ukraine, the bulk of the money going to Ukraine, and then some for Taiwan. Is the House going to separate that and deal with them one by one?
Exactly how it happens is still open. A lot of discussions are going on. There's a lot of interest as it relates to Ukraine, at least. Number one, to see us stand up to Putin, but to make sure that it's paid for. There's a bill called the Repo Act that would use Russian oligarch money to pay for aid to Ukraine, for example, and only limit it to the lethal aid, not propping up their government. And doing it as a loan, by the way. President Trump talked about that. There's a lot of interest in that as well. So, no final decisions have been made, but some good creative ideas are being put on the table as it relates to Ukraine. But Israel, we've been right there with Israel, and we will not waver.
All right. Full disclosure, you and I are both good friends with Mike Johnson, all of us from Louisiana. Mike inherited a pretty difficult job after working the way through this last appropriations bill where the table was pretty much set for him. And there's a lot of bad stuff in those appropriations bills that conservatives, myself included, didn't like. What options did he have?
They were very limited, unfortunately, Tony. And part of it starts with only a one-seat majority in the House. There's some of our members that weren't going to support anything, no matter what you put. We wanted to put some border security measures there, and there were some members that weren't even going to vote for that. And so, the other side knows that, and it weakens the negotiating position. But at the end of the day, we made it clear we weren't going to go backward and fund any additional things. Joe Biden, by the way, wanted billions more to process more illegals. He didn't get that. In fact, he got a 20% cut. Those NGOs, the groups that are moving illegals all around the country, they're going to take a 20% cut. I'd like to see even more cut, but at least that was something that was negotiated. The lion's share of that bill, by the way, over 70% of that bill was funding our Department of Defense, including the largest pay raise our troops have gotten in decades. And I think everybody would agree that our troops deserve that. We need to realign our Department of Defense to focus on the threat that China poses. That was also in the bill. That doesn't get talked about because, you and I can both agree on the things that we didn't like in that bill. 70% of the bill funds defense. If that goes away, we see a cut to defense at a time when the world is on fire.
So some were saying, well, you should have just shut the government down over the issue and refused to move forward with it. But at some point, you have to open government back up. And with that one-seat margin, I mean, what would you have had to give up to open government back up? Couldn't the end result be worse than what we saw in this bill?
Oh, it would have been much worse. And we had some of the members that were calling for a shutdown that were very clear that they wouldn't vote to come out of a shutdown. And look, let's be clear about a shutdown. A shutdown doesn't end Joe Biden's border policy. The president during a shutdown gets to decide what gets funded and what doesn't. That's not a law I like. It's a law that goes back to the 1970s where Congress started giving away the power of the purse. I think a lot of people in America think that the federal government works like most states. Our home state of Louisiana is like most states that has what's called zero-based budgeting, meaning if there's a shutdown, everything goes to zero. Government doesn't get a dime until they get an agreement. That's not how Washington works. During a shutdown, everything gets funded at current levels except the things the president of the United States deems non-essential. Well, guess what? This president is going to deem essential and non-essential. It's not going to be the things you and I agree with. So that's one of the challenges that you face is that if you get a shutdown, Joe Biden's making the decisions over what gets funded and what doesn't, and he would cut defense and other things that are important to us. He would not cut the processing of illegals. And we were just able to get a 20% cut there. We were able to give our Border Patrol agents more tools today to stop the flow of illegals, which is why the head of the Border Patrol supported that bill, by the way. So, again, there were a lot of bad choices. The real answer, Tony, is in November. We've got to get Donald Trump elected president if we want to really stop this madness. I mean, and I think, by the way, I think that will happen.
I mean, this is really kind of a choice between bad and ugly. You're right. Ultimately, we've got to increase those margins and get control of the Senate in order to get these measures through, and the White House, I would add. Steve Scalise, great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Always great being back with you. Happy Easter, Tony.